Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Lemon Dew podcast. I'm Brie, and in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about autism and vulnerability. Before I begin today's episode, I do want to apologise for the delay, mainly because I've been dealing with some personal issues in relation to my mental health. Aside from that, I wanted to make sure that I produced a great episode as always with consistent material, as I'm not really used to rushing content in order to fulfill a specific deadline. Although this episode doesn't have specific trigger warnings, I am going to be talking about some very sensitive topics here. So apart from that, I'm now going to begin. So vulnerability is something that I've learned to process throughout my life so far. Being vulnerable in general is something that I've had to deal with, especially because since childhood, I've discovered that I've been a very sensitive person who has a habit of crying easily. I would definitely say that throughout my experience, especially growing up with autism, vulnerability as well as feeling certain types of emotions, mainly sadness or grief, is something that I've had to learn to come to terms with, especially in relation to realizing that it's okay to feel sad, mainly because of awful experiences I've had in my personal life where people have mentioned the showing form of vulnerability is a sign of weakness. In relation to autism, if you do fall under the spectrum, you may find that you are prone to being more sensitive, particularly because in general, autistic people have a habit of being more honest as well as empathetic towards others. And in the case of neurotypical individuals, it's very difficult to tell when they display true emotion, particularly as they are prone to lying often. Now, of course, I'm not saying that autistic individuals are always honest, because you do have some that lie and take advantage of others. But I suppose this applies to people in general who may have had experiences of struggling with their emotions and vulnerability as a whole. When it comes to autistic people in relation to vulnerability, they end up being taken advantage of. And I guess this is because, and this is mostly coming from personal experience, that if an autistic individual shows a form of emotion, people around them can use it against them. And I know how it feels because this has happened to me mainly in my secondary school years, hence why I've developed a defense mechanism in order for people to see me as a strong woman when really I'm breaking down inside. In the case of vulnerability, autistic people can resort to people-pleasing in order to alleviate certain situations, and unfortunately, they get taken advantage of because there are instances where they are sacrificing their own health and well-being in order to make others happy. And again, this is something I've experienced mainly in secondary school, especially when I've had so-called friends expecting me to lend them things like equipment or even money. And of course, I would do so out of the kindness of my heart and expect nothing in return, which unfortunately made me more susceptible to being taken advantage of. When it comes to vulnerability, there are many reasons as to why autistic people feel the way they do. For example, with mental health needs, this adds on to vulnerability because if autistic individuals had poor experiences growing up due to certain situations like abuse, lack of employment opportunities, traumas like bullying, etc., they have a tendency to close themselves off from the world and trust people less. This is something that has actually happened to myself because growing up, especially in my teens, I've had instances where I've cried in school, mainly secondary school for example, and I've had my feelings used against me, as per mentioned. I actually recall very awful experiences where I used to be made fun of in secondary school for feeling over emotional. So, for example, back in year 7, when I was an 11-year-old student going through painful migraines and crying because of it, I had my drama teacher dragging me to the medical room and telling me that I was weak because I was crying. And this teacher was actually half black. And I know a lot of people might ask what race has to do with this, but of course I'm going to explain more because race has a lot to do with vulnerability in particular. I also had experiences in secondary school where I had an ex-friend making me feel like absolute crap. I remember they told me at one point that I made them feel weak because I cried too much. So it was almost as if I was around them, they would feel a certain type of way because I was sensitive and it was something that I couldn't help. And in secondary school, I was pretty much known to be a very quiet student. I wouldn't really talk to most of the other girls because I found it very difficult to make friends, especially because most people used to take advantage of me. And there were many instances where I would experience having certain girls in school asking me if I could do simple things without crying. For example, catching a ball in a PE lesson. And I suppose over the years, when it comes to vulnerability, I'm one of those people that has a habit of masking it, even around people that I can slowly open up to. And this is because over the years, I have used masking as a defense mechanism. So if, say, I'm at work and I'm doing my job as a receptionist and I feel upset, I have to hold back my tears until I'm in a place where I can be alone, where it's safe to cry. Because in a front-facing profession, crying in front of a client is probably going to create a negative look. And speaking as an autistic individual who has done front-facing jobs for more than 3 years, I've become pretty used to closing off most of my negative emotions because I have to get through the workday. I just have to get through it. And yes, it is pretty horrible knowing that I have to close off certain emotions, but this is how I've always been used to dealing with things. Now, unfortunately, speaking as an autistic individual who is also black, in my cultural background, black people are viewed to be stereotypically strong. So for those of you that probably don't know, I come from a Caribbean background despite being born in the UK, as my mum is Jamaican and my dad has family who comes from Barbados. And in the Caribbean culture, showing emotion means, in layman's terms, that something is often wrong with you. So if you are a sensitive person, especially one who is non-confrontational, that is an issue in the black community as a whole, especially in the black Caribbean community, because you're often taught that you have to be strong and you have to stand up for yourself. And if you don't like getting involved in physical fights, this is always a problem. And unfortunately, I've had very awful experiences where extended family have made fun of me for being emotional. So when I used to go to my grandma's, my dad's mum's house as a child, there were instances where I'd be subjected to verbal abuse, which I already talked about in detail in one of my past episodes. And if I cried or showed any form of emotion, I would be yelled at. And it was the same thing I experienced where a panic attack I had, mainly due to certain issues at home, as well as my deceased cousin's murder was invalidated. And I had an awful experience where a family friend told me before that I had to learn to get over it and that I was educated enough to get over it. And I was even asked, why can't I be strong? Why can't I be strong like my mum? And this is a huge issue with the Black community. You are not allowed to express how you feel because that is wrong. And unfortunately, this is a part of the reason why I hate my quote-unquote culture and why I always despise my skin. But of course, going into the topic of why I despise my own skin colour is going to be revealed in another episode. But going back to the topic of autism and vulnerability, as well as vulnerability as a whole, there's a part of me that's noticed that men are not given the freedom or the permission to be vulnerable because, like Black people as a whole, men are viewed as the stronger sex and women are viewed as the weaker sex. So if you're a woman and you cry, depending on which culture you come from and such, it's okay. But if you're a man and you're crying, then unfortunately you are viewed as weak because in stereotypical terms, you're supposed to be able to protect a woman and hold her and comfort her. You're not the one who's allowed to go through stressful times. It's only the woman that can do that. And this is another issue, is vulnerability is often seen as a very taboo subject because one thing is that in life, at least in this modern society, which I feel is somewhat sick to a degree, people like to encourage you to talk about vulnerability or even your mental health. But then when you do so, you have judgmental comments thrown at you left, right, and centre, and it gets to a point where you can't express how you feel, and you keep things to yourself because there's no point to expressing how you feel. And this is something I've endured throughout most of my life, where even though I have instances where I'm around people who support me, I still have to defend myself because if I come across a new person in my life, I have no idea how they're going to react. If, say, for example, I tell them I have clinical depression and I used to take medication for it, so I keep that to myself because it's just easier. It's my way of dealing with things. And in the case of autism, if you're vulnerable, you're often gaslighted into thinking you are the problem. So it's almost as if you don't really have feelings. You can't really be treated like a human being like everyone else. So if, say, for example, somebody sprayed perfume in a room and the smell irritated them because of aversion to certain smells or textures, the autistic individual is told to chill out and get over themselves. And unfortunately, again, I've had experiences, mainly in secondary school, where I've had to get over certain things because I'm in a building, let alone a world, that is not catered to people like myself because I'm classed as a minority. So I have to force myself to adjust to a world which was never built for me in the first place. And I have to manage things one step at a time because that's the only way I can deal with life. And I don't know how I'm managing in life right now, especially as I work a full-time job and I'm able to conduct myself in a certain way. I don't know how I'm doing it, but somehow I'm managing to do okay. And I guess that's an achievement considering that a lot of autistic people are most likely worse off than myself. And going back to the topic, expressing boundaries in relation to vulnerability is so hard. You're sacrificing your own wants, you're sacrificing your needs, all for the sake of keeping other people happy. And you feel exhausted because you're often trying to maintain peace. You're trying to force yourself to keep everyone else happy for a long period of time. And it's awful. It's just awful. And I guess one thing I've learned in relation to myself and vulnerability as a whole is that it's okay if you feel sad. Nobody can be happy 24/7, and people who think you can be happy 24/7 are the types that encourage toxic positivity, which is unfortunately a thing. And it's not to say being positive is bad, but toxic positivity does exist, and I'm going to be honest, it really does. So there you go. But I suppose one thing I'm slowly trying to process is that it's okay to smile, it's okay to cry, it's okay to laugh. And again, I often hold back negative emotions because that's how I've dealt with things for a long time. But I'm trying my best to just cry instead of holding it in, because sometimes when you hold in negative emotions, it's almost as if you're like a volcano, you're just waiting to erupt. And it's not a good thing, because there's this part of you that feels blocked inside. And at the end of the day, if you have clinical depression or any other form of mental health need, and you have negative emotions that you're feeling, just process it as you go along. Because at the end of the day, you have every right to feel how you want to feel, and there is no point in simply trying to mask yourself in order to please people around you who are most likely not going to care. Because unfortunately, with modern society, a lot of people don't really care if you're going through a tough time, because the majority of the world is self-centered. And if you do feel vulnerable, then it's better to go through things as they come in your life and express how you truly feel with people that understand you. Because at the end of the day, if you talk to people that don't understand you, of course they're going to judge you, because it's almost as if you're just throwing yourself into the deep end. And that's something I really don't want to do anymore. I just can't do this to myself. So anyway, I know this is a bit of a short episode, but as always, I wanted to thank you all for supporting my podcast. Although the audience I have is quite small, I am really grateful for the amount of people who listen to my episodes, because it means that I'm making a difference to somebody's life. And I mean, I'm not really doing this podcast to become famous. I'm mostly doing this to talk about my experiences of growing up with autism, and also, in a sense, giving a voice to those who are unable to express themselves. So I am going to be releasing another episode in the next 2 weeks. So of course the 2-week schedule still continues. And if there are any changes to the schedule, I will always continue to provide timely updates as best as I can for consistency purposes. So the next episode is going to be about autism and toxic friendships, in which I talk about my experiences of making friends with people and how I've dealt with certain friendships in my life that were obviously not suitable for me. Of course, this episode is going to be released on a Sunday, just like every other episode, considering my work schedule. And this particular episode is going to be released on the 25th of August 2024. As always, I hope you guys enjoy your day. I hope you all have a great Sunday. And if you are off for the summer holidays, then just enjoy the time that you have and really take the time to relax and recoup. But if not, I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you again on the 25th of August. Thank you, and goodbye for now.